I am Moa.
I am Maja.
And we are the co-founders of Earth Mothers Rising.
We walk alongside women in their conception, pregnancy, birth, and motherhood journeys.
The how is ever changing because it is guided by the flow of our intuition.
The why is always the same. When women come together to heal, magic happens.
When women heal, we change the world.
Rise, Earth, Mothers rise, 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 Earth, Mothers rise, rise, rise.
Welcome to the Earth Mothers Rising podcast.
A space where the sacred birth workers Moa and Maja share about all things conscious conception, childbirth, pregnancy, and motherhood.
Always from a holistic perspective with a twist of magic. Hi, lovelies. Maja here. High on life after a beautiful mother blessing ceremony that I facilitated this weekend. And Moa, she's busy resting up after an intense but also beautiful weekend, diving deep into her gardening and herb magic. Today is a very special day for us. We share a very exciting episode. We are so excited to introduce our first guest, Nina, who is also a soul sister of ours and a fellow sacred birth worker. She came on to share her pregnancy journey and birth story with her son, Kylo. She had a natural birth center birth, and it is a very beautiful experience that she shares so vulnerably with us. Nina, she is full of wisdom, and we just loved having her. And also, a little teaser that I want to share is that we will be co-creating something very magical with Nina next summer. Something that you definitely don't want to miss out on. It involves women gathering and magic, as there always is when women gather to heal. So stay tuned for that. Something else that I want to share before I let you dive deep into Nina's birth story is that we from now on will be inviting guests on to our podcast, and that will be women coming on to tell their birth stories, but also other medicine women, if I can call them that. Just magical women that will share their unique medicine that they put out there into the world. So if you have someone that you would like to hear on our podcast, don't hesitate to reach out. You find us at Earth Mothers Rising on Instagram. Oh, and one last thing that I almost forgot to mention. Next week, Moa and we are hosting a women's circle via Zoom. So head to Instagram, the handle that I already told you, Earth Mothers Rising, and there you find all the information on how you sign up and what this magical circle will involve. I feel like I've said the word magic and magical about 10,000 times this intro, but that just speaks to the work that we do. It's magic. Now, enjoy Nina's birth story. Good morning, girls.
Good morning.
We have Nina with us today. We feel very honored. She's a dear friend of us and a fellow sacred birth worker.
Yes, such a beautiful, amazing woman. Yeah, and you're here, Nina, to tell your birth story today. But first, would you like to tell us a bit more about who you are?
Yes, thank you, you too. Thank you so much for having me today. It's such an honor to be among the first guests here on your podcast.
You're the very first guest, actually.
The very first, actually. Oh, wow.
Yeah, perfect
even
first
greater.
guest.
I feel so blessed. And I mean that. I don't just say it. So, my name is Nina. I am the mother of a beautiful 2.5-year-old. He's called Kylo. Not here today, so he's not going to interrupt us like on some other podcasts I used to do. Well, what to say about me? I'm originally from Germany. I'm living here currently in an area close to where I grew up with my husband and our beautiful son. I did the Sacred Birth Worker mentorship, one cohort before you too. So I did it about a year ago. And it's been really, really beautiful to connect with all of that, all of the birth world in such a deep sense after giving birth myself. For me, giving birth was, yeah, it really was one of the most profound moments of my life. The whole journey throughout, like conception, pregnancy, giving birth, and then also especially now 2.5 years into motherhood have been among the most transforming episodes of my life, I would say. Definitely the most challenging, but also the most beautiful. And what else there to say? I have to say I am finding it difficult to like talk about what I do these days, because I feel like I'm undoing a lot, I'm unlearning a lot, and just becoming more of myself without like putting new roles on top necessarily. I think what I can say is I think in my core, I am a sacred space holder. I think that's one of the things I've been doing almost all my life, whether I call it that or not. And yeah, I love connecting with humans. I love to experience all of life and the full humanness of life. I love to dive into all the different areas of the, and not just of the spiritual realm, but like especially also that I love to dive into my own shadow work and to also hold people in their processes and their transformations. Yeah,
That's a
I think.
beautiful introduction. I just want to say before we dive deeper into the conversation, I have my son here today. You said Kyla wasn't there today, but I have my son. So if you hear a little baby in the background, you know what it is. I wanted to ask you, Nina, I know you have a journey, like the way of living that you describe now, I think wasn't always obvious to you. I know you've made a journey, and the way you and your partner and your son is living today is very inspiring. So I want to ask if you want to tell us a little bit more about that journey. Like, where did you start? Who was Nina? I don't know, maybe 5 years ago or longer?
Yeah,
And how did it take you to where you are today?
I think starting 5 years ago actually isn't enough to like paint the whole story. I think I would have to go back at least 7 or 8 years ago. I think that was before David and I met. And I think even those 1 or 2 years leading up to that, especially the last year leading up to that, were years where I basically went from a big transition from like out of union into my first jobs. And those years were quite challenging for me because there was a lot of like adversity, a lot of like a lot of moments that really put me into places that challenged me like at a core level. I was basically fired from my first job after just a couple of months, and back then it was a whole big story, which I kept the story with me for a couple years. Like it was a story that kept replaying and kept coming up also, and defined a lot of like who I was for a long time. The fun part is I didn't even leave that job. It was more like it was supposed to be a warning to motivate. And something inside me, yeah, something happened inside of me that like, it's very fuzzy now, but it's also difficult. Like it doesn't really have to have a lot to do with me giving birth. How do I put this in a nutshell? It was a moment that really defined my path, whether I want to take responsibility for where I am going or whether I let somebody else on the outside define my worth and my path. And I think that started like was one of the moments that started my spiritual journey, because I really needed to like just what is it that I want to do. I mean, at the time I was still looking at a lot of things. What do I not want to do? And I was, that was sort of the way of learning at the time, like seeing things and going, okay, this sounds good. I don't want to do it this way.
Isn't that very related to your birth story, though? Like letting someone else define you or try to steer your journey, or,
Maybe in some way it is. Although I think for like it was more of a precursor, as in preparing me to like be in a place where I had like over those 7, 8, 9 years, I actually learned to fully trust my intuition, because it was something, I think it was quite strong. Also, like all of that witchy stuff, playing witches, all of these things, it was all very strong in my youth. And then somehow throughout the following years, like the later youth and then early adolescence, this all got shut down a little bit. And then I entered this very masculine business world. Everything was hyper rational, hyper like coming from the mind, like everything very logical. And like, you know, you have to have your argumentation laid down for everything. Like knowing or intuition didn't really have a place. And I think that whole journey at work, but then also like meeting David and like basically reviving all of these things together, that was definitely a big part of preparing me for actually giving birth and for making the choices that I made and that we are still making. I think, yeah, in its essence, like a lot of the things really helped me to ground in myself, in my intuition, in my connection to nature, and then to really acknowledge that this path is one of self-determination, of self-responsibility. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe to make it a little bit more tangible, I think it was like very, very high level now. So yeah, I think my path started, like, of course it started with my own birth, like as all our paths do. But yeah, this like going on that unusual path, let's call it this way, that you described, I think it started back then with instilling that fire again, seeing that, okay, I don't want to do what everybody else is doing, even though like at the time I didn't know what it was, but I knew I didn't want anyone else to determine what my path was. And then I met my husband about a year later, I think. In that year, there was a lot of like reconnecting with myself, reconnecting with what is it that I actually want. I didn't change anything on the outside yet. I actually went back into that job and I stayed there up until last year, which is absolutely insane. But it also, I think, speaks to, I believe in transformation happening from within. You know, I don't think that we need to, like, we don't necessarily need to change a lot on the outside for things to change. I think the most important thing is usually for us to change, start to change within and transform. And then at some point, the outside changes naturally. Yeah. And then meeting my husband was one of the biggest synchronicities you can imagine. I think that that together with like my leadership journey at work, like taking, like officially having responsibility for other people and their work, like those two were like huge catalysts for my spiritual journey. And I dove in head first, working with so many different people, with coaches, with healers, with all sorts of different things. And in the end, one theme that always came through is really trusting your intuition. And also at the time I would call it finding my purpose, but I think that's not really what it was. Like I also had a big trouble finding my purpose because I don't think we find it. I think we carry it within. It's more of accessing what's already there. That's what I know now. I didn't
Coming
know at
home.
the time. And I think it was more like navigating whatever was given to me and discerning what is it actually that feels like my calling, like something that lights me up, something that brings me joy. So it was also like a big part of that journey was reconnecting with my joy. And yeah, I did that throughout the years by doing various trainings. I think the first big one I did was becoming a coach. And then I became pregnant, and throughout that, I self-taught basically myself a lot of the things around that. But I also tried to not over-prepare, you know.
How far along into your relationship did you get pregnant?
So we met in early 2018, and then we got pregnant in mid 2022. So 6 years, 4
And
years.
was it a conscious conception journey?
4 years. Wow. It actually was quite. So it started coincidentally. It was actually so. No, I have to say it actually started right after we got married. So we got married quite quickly. Like we met and we just knew like we are not in this lifetime, but we just know each other. And we also like on that first night that we actually met, we both had this like very clear vision that we were going to do this together and we were going to marry and have children. And I mean, at the time it was really scary for a couple of weeks, and it took a lot for us to actually work with all of that. and come back to trust.
Do you mean it was scary when you first met or when you started conceiving?
No, it was scary when we first met. Just like, having such a big like revelation. Oh, this is the person I'm going to spend my life with. So, and then we got married 1.5 years later in 2020. And while we were on our way to our honeymoon, there was this moment where like we just saw, no, I, and then also we connected so clearly with that soul that was waiting. I mean, it was more of a feeling. It wasn't any kind of conversation or anything, but it was this feeling that someone was already there and waiting for us to be ready. And I remember sitting in a car and just like tears streaming down my face, and it was such a beautiful moment. But I could also feel that I wasn't ready, and at the time, like, that was in the midst of the whole COVID situation, and there was a lot going on. I was feeling all of that very strongly, so it felt right at the time to wait a little bit. And then friends of ours had their first babies, basically the first babies among close friends. With that, I could feel that the motherly instincts were rising, and like I would start to see more babies all around me, and would get more and more excited with seeing them and holding them. And then there was this moment in late, I think 2021, where my period was late for 8 days. And on day 8, like I could feel myself getting a little excited, by the thought of, it would actually be quite nice. But then my period came, and I was a little disappointed. And my husband felt the same. So we were like, maybe it would be the right time now to get started conceiving. And then we started trying very actively. And nothing happened. And I was like, at the time, I was already like, I could feel my body really preparing to get pregnant. And so I wasn't really into alcohol anymore. I was like eating more and more healthy. Like, I've been eating healthy has been a big thing for me for a long time. So, but even more. And I remember thinking myself, like, for many years actually, when I get pregnant, I'm gonna like eat even more healthy. But that all happened throughout a couple of years actually, which was a much healthier journey. And I think especially during those 6 months, it was more, okay, I'm actually not doing all of that for having a baby or for becoming pregnant. I'm doing it for myself. And that was actually, I think that was a big and very important shift that happened. So we tried conceiving for about 7, 8 months. And in that period, we were actually like, I definitely have a thing for putting pressure upon myself. It's a theme that like, it's visible in my own birth, and I actually carried over from a past life, as I learned recently. And I'm very good at that. Let's put it this way. And I've learned not to put as much pressure on myself now, but it's definitely taken that whole journey of pregnancy to get to another layer of that. So at the time, I would definitely put a lot of pressure on myself, which certainly is not helpful for getting pregnant. Yeah. So at some point, like, we just had this conversation of, hey, maybe we just stop trying and try to not try. Just like bring the joy back in, make it fun, and just try not think about like becoming pregnant too much. Yeah. And I think it wasn't super long after that we felt pregnant. We did one last parasite cleanse, a detox program for 10 days, which was when we had done fasting like for a couple of years before, every 6 months. But that detox and parasite cleanse really, it was so wholesome on every level. And I think just a couple of weeks after that. And actually, there was one other big detox and cleanse happening, which was us. And that was like the process that started in the beginning of that year. While I was doing my coaching training, that was also a big part of it, that we realized we need to leave Berlin. We were living in Berlin at the time, and I had been living there for, I think, about 7 years or something. And David, 2 years, basically came to Berlin 2 years later. And we had always thought, maybe we just need to find a bigger flat. Maybe we just need to find like something with a garden, like something, something within Berlin still, like that changes our environment. But nothing would come up. Like, I would try everything that I learned during those years about manifestation, like aligning myself, putting like doing affirmations in that direction, like manifesting with the moon cycles. Like at the time, like we were also doing some women's circles, and like all of these things were up on my boards and my lists and my, but nothing happened. Nothing would come up. So at some point, we basically did a coaching session for ourselves, and we realized maybe it's not finding a new setting in Berlin. Maybe it's actually following that that dream that we had for a long time of actually, yeah, leaving the city and traveling more and becoming digital nomads and trying out many different things and seeing if there's some other places in the world that actually are speaking to us. And I think then we took all those steps along the way. Like it was like one big realization on that path was really that we don't have to make decisions forever. We just need to stay in the moment, and we make the decision for now. And whenever it doesn't suit us anymore, we can change it and we can make different choices again. I think once we had that realization, we actually started co-creating with the universe on a whole different level. Also our presence, like being present in the moment, all of that was part of those years before, for sure. But in that moment, it got a whole new level.
Up level.
Yeah. And then we followed those decisions. We took the steps. And I think we moved out somewhere in August, and 2 weeks later, we were pregnant.
Of course. Did you take a pregnancy test, or how did you just know, or tell us that story?
So for somehow, like on my birthday, which is like the 31st of August, on that day, David brought me we had already moved out, but we were in Berlin staying at a friend's place, and he was bringing me a birthday present. And somehow, like while he was bringing me that, I already know it's a baby. I mean, he didn't bring me a baby, he brought me a ring. Somehow for like in that moment, it was clear to me that there was a baby. And I think in that following week, I would start to feel the first signs of like having this tiny little bit of nausea. Really the tiniest, you probably, yeah. But I was feeling that there, like something was going on. And then the week after, we stayed at another friend's place, I think. And we were having we weren't. Yeah, we weren't. We were having we called it See You Berlin celebration, where we had, we combined it with a birthday brunch and then invited all of our friends. And I think I knew at the time. Yeah, I didn't tell anyone anything. I think David and I spoke about it. But of course, it was way too early. But I also didn't feel like taking a test at the time. I was just like, yeah. I mean, I wasn't drinking alcohol or anything for like probably almost a year before anyway. So that wasn't a theme. And then interestingly, a good friend of ours, she gifted me a tiny little agate stone, like one of those, the cave ones. And she said something about, yeah, it's also really good for protection of like pregnancies and pregnant women. We had spoken about like wanting to become pregnant at the time, but she definitely didn't tell her, but it was in the air. And then I think the week after also, I took a test. Yeah. And we were so excited. We actually took a moment, like a photo of the moment that we took the test, and you can see our faces glowing like crazy.
Did you take the test together, or tell us that story? How did it unfold?
How did it? I think we bought a test. I don't remember where, but we bought, like, David and I, our relationship is such that we actually do almost everything together. So much that for like a long part of our journey, like I was questioning, are we codependent? But we're not. We just like being together, and we are able to give ourselves like each their own spaces, so we can be fully ourselves and do our own thing without interfering each other, but still being in the same room. It's like, yeah.
Having witnessed you two together, I definitely say it's not about codependency. You have such a beautiful union. And when you say that you do everything together, I'm just like, yeah, of course they do. And it's just beautiful.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for that. And at the same time, it took a lot of work. And it still takes. It's just a continuous, but it doesn't feel like work. I mean, sometimes it does, but most of the time it doesn't. Anyway, yeah, so we bought the test together. We took the tests in the bathroom of that friend that we stayed in, at the place that we stayed in. And then I think we also looked at the results together. And I remember I have a tendency, like when I am overwhelmed by emotion, like even if I want to cry, I can't, that's been the case when David proposed. It actually was the same thing when Kylo was born. And yeah, I this is definitely something that I carry with me. Like I carry so much emotion inside of me, and it's so much that in that moment I can't release. And then usually a couple of, like, sometimes days, sometimes hours, sometimes, whatever, it comes out. But it was definitely one of those moments where like I was so charged up with emotion, like so much joy and so much like also relief, but mostly joy and anticipation and excitement that I just couldn't cry. I think David cried. That's usually our pattern.
I love that, and I can relate to what you're saying so much. So then, the pregnancy, how did it unfold? How did you feel? Did you have a lot of nausea going forward? You mentioned you had a little bit of nausea there in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. So like that little bit of not like it was really like it was the tiniest bit and just enough for me to get to go, what's this? It's not my usual like me in the morning. But it wasn't like actual nausea. Like I've heard stories of friends what their nausea felt like to them. And like in general, that whole pregnancy, it was very, very easy on me. I would like with the nausea, I would have this funny thing of like, especially in the first trimester and like those first couple of weeks, like I could feel something going on inside of my stomach and it felt like a hormone release. And I would get this tiny little bit of nausea, which I knew because yeah, well, we have experimented with some different, let's say, consciousness expanding substances. We definitely had our wild times, and somehow it felt so familiar, and then after a second it was gone. And that's how I could put the pieces together that this was actually like hormones being released. Yeah, and then I would sneeze and then it was gone. That was my nausea. And then other than that, like I mean at the time I had a very like I had a daily yoga practice going on, a lot of like yoga and then also intuitive movement, meditation here and there. So I had a very conscious practice going on. And I think that served me very well. That helped my body a lot. I was eating very, very clean at the time, like fully vegan. I think throughout the pregnancy, I started to reintegrate eggs and some cheese for proteins and for, but especially the eggs. Like that was the one thing that my gynecologist, who was very supportive even of me like continuing my vegan diet throughout the pregnancy, but she said like if you want to integrate the eggs because they are so full of nutrients. And I did, and I have to say like also that got a level up because I just made sure that I really, really knew where those eggs came from, how those chickens were treated. That yeah, tiny chickens were killed, these kind of things. And yeah, I could feel that the eggs were doing great on my body. But yeah, so a really healthy diet. And I didn't really have a lot of like strange cravings, but I could really feel my intuitive eating growing even stronger again. So I would really feel when like I needed more fruit or when I needed like something more like more dense in my body, or when I just needed more energy. But most of the time the cravings were for like specific fruits or vegetables. Very dark chocolate. I was eating, I think especially in the later like times of the pregnancy, I was eating like a tiny piece of really, really dark, like 85, 90, 95, 99% chocolate. And I also like, of course, at the time I found an article which went on about like that eating chocolate on a daily basis, like that high percentage cacao was actually supposed to, or there were studies that it made for healthier and more happy babies because of the endorphin release in the mother while the baby's in the belly. And of course, that's affecting the babies too.
Again, so
But that really
important to
speaks
enjoy
to
and reintroduce the joy. Sorry,
Yeah.
were we talking at the same time?
That's all right.
Yeah, just
No, I just want to
noting
say that really
the
speaks.
importance of
This is
no,
always our
no one
issue,
dares to
the
speak.
delay. Now, I wanted to say it really speaks to how in tune you are with your body wisdom when you're pregnant and your intuition, especially if you've done the work before. Your body will tell you what you need. Your body will tell you maybe what the baby needs too, and the baby probably needed that chocolate.
Yeah, and I did too. I also I'm convinced. I mean, of course I only know for myself, and I did all of that work, like all of that, like inner spiritual work, all of that, like physical, like all of these physical changes for years before becoming pregnant. And at the same time, I know in my bones that even if I wouldn't have done that preparation, my body would tell me. And I think that's the case for every woman. Like our bodies are designed to do that. I think it's more of a matter, am I attuned and can I tune out everything else on the outside enough to actually listen?
You mentioned your gynecologist. Did you appoint her straight away, or what was your Like, what kind of pregnancy did you want? Did you want it monitored 100%, or did you have it like, I don't know, a little bit monitored, like a couple of ultrasounds, or what was the pregnancy like?
Yeah, so my gynecologist, like I had been going to her for like routine checkups for a couple of years before, so I knew her already. And throughout those years, I was super happy with her. She was always very supportive. I think I have to say, or maybe to put this into context, I come from an environment that's very used to routine checks, that's also very rather medically minded. So my dad, he's a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist and emergency doctor. I myself was born in a hospital, and so were my siblings. I think even my mom and all of her siblings were already born in hospital. I guess my dad as well, but I don't know. But I spoke to my mom a lot about these things, our red thread, and the maternal lineage, about like how like she gave birth, and about how my grandmother gave birth. And I think all of that mostly came from a sense of like trust in the medical system, which, yeah, I guess at the time, like, or in general, like if you're in that plane of reality, it's a really good thing, you know, like if you feel like you can trust that and it feels safe to you, then it's a wonderful place to be. And for them, it was. Like they all had really good experiences. Of course, when you dig in, like you can discern and you can say, but that's not how it's supposed to be. But yeah, I have to say, I'm really working on being not judgmental with these kind of things. If they feel like their experience was good, then it was perfect. Even if I for myself find that there were certain moments, so there was this moment during my birth, for example, where the obstetrician threw himself onto my mother's belly so that everything could continue, because there was this like, yeah, things would not really progress. And if I dig more and more into that story, of course, I find more evidence as to why that was the case. But that's only my story for myself. But for my mom, it was a beautiful birth, and she was very happy with how everything progressed. So yeah, but I'm talking about context here, right? So I grew up with like anything that the medical system says you do, you do. And so when I became pregnant, and now, I mean, it's been 2.5 years now. But I mean, the pregnancy is already 3.5 years away. So it's very interesting to look back at all of that now, with me having gone through again such a like tremendously transformative process in those more than 3 years. But at the time when I became pregnant, for me, it was clear I'm going to get an ultrasound. That was actually the first thing that I wanted to do. Like we took the test, I think a few weeks after we actually after I knew, and then we called the obstetrician right away when we could come in for like an ultrasound to confirm. And I think she then told me, yeah, you have to wait for a couple of weeks, otherwise you're not going to see anything. And I think we actually had the first ultrasound at 6 weeks, and I still have that picture with me, and I truly treasured it. Like that was really, it was so important for me, because I also grew up with, and I still have them, with like huge photo albums, and especially those ones from the first couple of months and years, they all have the ultrasound pictures in it. So that was part of my normality of what it's like to be pregnant. And so we had quite a lot of ultrasounds. I'm not sure if more than prescribed, because at the time I didn't know
What's the standard in Germany? Do you know?
I think around 3 or 4. Yeah, something like this. I think usually you don't do a super early one, but I think maybe at like 10 weeks or something. And then there's definitely one around like midterm at 20 weeks, and then a later one. And then you have these optional ones, which you do if you do like the in-depth checking like of the bones and the organs, and checking that there's no
Like an anatomy scan?
Yes, exactly. So I think that one there's one that happens around 11 weeks, and then one more that happens around 20 something, I think. So if you do all of that, you will end up with about 5 ultrasounds. And I think we did all of those. And just knowing my gynecologist, she's like very open to ultrasound. And so maybe we even had one more, which is interesting, because like knowing everything that I learned now about ultrasound, I'm not sure if I want to have one again. But of
But
course,
that
that's
was right
only
for that pregnancy.
exactly. And I absolutely acknowledge that it's easy to say from that standpoint now, not being pregnant, and also like, yeah, only looking at it from the hindsight. I don't know if maybe I would have acted differently if I know like all of the information around ultrasound that I know now. Maybe I wouldn't. But at the time it was perfect. And actually it was also, I think it was actually quite good that we did like these ultrasounds, because otherwise we would not have found out the gender beforehand, because we always said we don't need to know, like we're happy to be surprised, but if we see it ourselves on the ultrasound, what do you want to do? And so it happened. I think that was in the second trimester somewhere, maybe month 4 or 5 of the pregnancy, that we were scheduled for an ultrasound, and she put the thing on my belly and you could see the baby sitting on it. Yeah. And it was very clear that it was a boy, which, well, I can feel I have a little bit of hesitation saying that publicly, but I'm going to say it anyway because I'm going to tell my son that story just as it is. I think in those first weeks, I somehow felt like it would be a girl. I don't know how much of that was like sensing into the spirit world, no idea, or how much was actually wishful thinking. I definitely, looking back now, I definitely was painting images in my mind with my firstborn being a girl for a longer time. Actually, no, actually, that was on the radar like already for a few years, because I think one of the first names that we put down was a girl name. And that was like long before we were even thinking of like conceiving. So that picture was always there. And at the time I was working in sustainability, and I was dealing a lot also with the social aspects of sustainability, you know, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So all of these things related to feminism and related to, yeah, equity and equality, not equality, equity and diversity in the workplace and in the world and in leadership positions was very top of mind. And so I had this dream of I'm going to pass on all of that knowledge to my daughter, and you know, but I think now looking at it, that's exactly why I needed to have a son as my firstborn, because he actually taught me so much about how I was sometimes falling into the traps of feminism, you know, where you like where I can't speak for everyone, but where I would really like be a little bit too self-absorbed and not take the full picture into account, you know, and look through the lens of women sometimes a little bit too much, and forgetting about what some of the things that I would be saying felt like for men who were doing all the things right. And like after finding out, like there was a brief, like I needed to grieve that dream of like having a girl as my first one for a moment, which at the same time, like I would start to feel a little bit of guilt, of course, you know, because I was carrying this baby and it was not a girl, it was a boy. And I loved it like just as it was. And I also told told my son while he was in my belly that many times. And at the same time, I would also explain to him and to myself, like where I was coming from. And then, like after I gained that knowledge, thanks to the ultrasound, so it definitely had its reason to be there. I started adjusting and I started reframing and well, basically repainting that picture in my mind, what it would be like to be like to be the mother of a boy first. You know, all of those, because I was like, I think before I would like really favor movies that would put girls in the front, and I was always demanding for more of that, you know, these kind of things. And then when I learned that I carried a little boy, it all got a little more balanced again, like really. And I could feel my heart actually opening and widening and asking for like more conscious, more holistic representation for all children and not just for the girls. So yeah, somehow it was a big inner process happening through that. And then I think the other big inner process throughout the pregnancy was one around setting boundaries, where I could really feel that my son was teaching me, like while already being in my belly, such a valuable lesson around what it actually means to set boundaries. And I thought I had learned to set boundaries in the years before, and I did. But again, it was like another layer completely, because like at the time I was working a lot, still like way beyond the 40, 50, 60 hours sometimes per week. And while I was I was loving what I was doing at the time due to the sustainability aspects, but still it was so demanding. And I would very often go out of my way to fight for what I thought was right. Very idealistic. And I would lose so much energy on the way because I was going against walls that were just there and going against like glass ceilings that were just there that I tried to move. I really tried, but I just couldn't. Yeah, I think in the pregnancy, I learned to really just feel into what feels good for me and that I don't need to change the world for everyone. Actually reminding me to like start changing my world and adjusting to my needs and then letting everything else around that change. So it was, it was a big process of surrender, like that whole pregnancy and everything that's been following after that.
And how did you plan for the birth? Did you have like a plan? Did you know what you wanted?
Yeah, so I mean, at the time, we already did not have a home anymore. We were nomads basically. We were traveling mostly in Europe, and then we were staying with our parents quite a bit, especially after having learned that we were pregnant. And before we had big travel plans to go to Asia and travel more. But yeah, I just felt like at the time it felt a little, or it was becoming winter, and I think I felt the need to to hide away a little bit and just live a little bit of a calm life. So we were feeling into what our options really were. And on the horizon so I was thinking, for some reason, I knew I didn't want to go into a hospital. My intuition was very, very clear about that. And while I was sure to not over prepare. I did read a few books. I was following a few accounts on Instagram. Yeah, but that knowing I didn't want to go to the hospital, it was just so clear within me. Because I intuitively knew that all of that, like everything I had seen in movies and hearing the stories around me about, births that weren't like a celebration of life, that wasn't my truth. And so we were looking at different birth centers. There was one that was recommended by my gynecologist, and that was actually the birth center that we ended up giving birth in. I also got a recommendation from a friend, and then the other options were I was feeling into what it would be like giving birth at my mom's home, so the house that I grew up in. But I could also feel that would have been, I don't know, it felt crowded somehow. Too many people thinking because it's not my home anymore, that who were in charge of the place and who felt like they were, or who could potentially feel like they were in charge of my decisions. And so that somehow faded out. My dad would have wanted me to give birth at the hospital where he's working. And he also said it a couple of times. He even said, we can create a birth center here at the at the hospital. So yeah, it was actually very sweet. But I was talking to a midwife that he recommended to me at the time, and she also really supported me in trusting my instincts and trusting my intuition. If I don't want to go to the hospital, that there's a reason for it. And she's working in a hospital herself. I could feel that her confirm what my intuition was already telling me. And the other options that we were feeling into was going to Bali and give birth there. Which is funny because we went to Bali 3 months after giving birth. For 2 months, actually, we stayed there. And I think we were quite close to doing that. But then once we had gone to that birth center, it felt so aligned and so beautiful, like the surrounding, the light, the atmosphere, and also all of the midwives that we spoke to there. And it felt like, if I now look back, it really feels like that transitory place, which helped me to basically serve all of that conditioning that I inherited. It helped me also navigate any potential fears that would arise and uncertainty that was still there because it was my first birth. And I wasn't as educated about it as I am now. And it allowed me to really follow my intuition, but within a safe space, without fully exposing myself to a completely new environment. And really, because I also have a tendency to put myself in places where I'm completely overwhelmed with everything. And of course, that will transform a lot, but it's also it can be very painful and it is very exhausting. So I think that was sort of the middle way, which was perfect for us at the time and for me at the time. Yeah. And then from there on, we also, I think we went to Berlin for the birth about 6 weeks before giving birth. Or actually, yeah, I think it was 6 weeks before the estimated due date. Maybe it was 7. But then Kylo was born 9 days after his guest date. So we spent a couple of weeks acclimating. I rented a flat through a friend for that period, for I think for 3.5 months in total. Yeah. And I could really feel myself becoming more slow and less social, but only throughout the last couple of weeks. For most of it, like I was still very very happy to see people, very happy to be outside. We really enjoyed the beautiful spring of Berlin. Yeah, and just being with ourselves and with the baby. We were communicating, like, yeah, we were really communicating a lot with Kylo also throughout the pregnancy. I did a few meditations, guided ones, to really connect. And then we spoke to him whenever we could, and we didn't really read him stories, but David would sometimes tell him a little bit about the day. It was very wholesome, very beautiful moments that we spent.
So let's dive into the birth. Did you have any early signs? Sorry, my son really wants the microphone and nothing else.
You want to be part of the conversation, Miu, huh? Yes. So as I said, I could feel myself really easing into the whole process. I mean, we were like, Kyle was born 9 days after the guest date, so there was definitely a lead up. And I think at the time I was still feeling really really well, very healthy, very energetic. That actually continued even throughout the birth. It never went away. But what I did notice was changing was I was like, I couldn't walk as far anymore. So before we would always take like still very long walks to the nearby park, and then through all of that park. Yeah, somehow I think the last day or two before, we would only like do like half of the round, and then the last day I barely could, like, we were walking, and it was getting really hot. It was end of May, so those were the first really warm days, and sometimes even hot. And we would walk to this restaurant, and I was sitting there, and like everything was too much. It was too hot. It was too far, and I just wanted to go home. So we did. And on the way back, I could really feel it. Like I was getting a little short of breath. And I think that was the first time I would have this like typical pregnancy walk, like with the feet really turning outside and like swaying a little bit. And I was like, I could notice that there was a proper change happening. And so I think we were scheduled for the next day to come in for a checkup at the birth center, because we were 9 days overdue according to the standards. And at that time in Germany, I think once you pass the 1 week mark, you have much closer knitted checkups, I think almost every second day or something. And so we were scheduled again to come in the next day anyways. I think in the morning, by the way, I was still doing like my full 25 minutes yoga practice. So that was still a part of that whole thing. I think I even have a video of that. And then during the night, I could actually feel that there were like practice contractions coming, and they were getting like, I think I was feeling something like a day before maybe, but like hard to notice. But then during the night, I was actually starting to breathe through, and I could sense that like it was getting more intense. But it felt like practice contractions to me, or at least that's what I thought. I mean, of course, I didn't have a comparison at all. Yeah, and so during the night, contractions were getting more intense, whatever that means. Like talking about it now, it's like, I mean, it's so far away, but still I can feel it. But I also know it's so relative. Like, I know my limit for experiencing pain is rather high. So I don't know if like what I felt at the time, maybe for someone would have already felt like a proper contraction. But for me, it felt like, okay, I need to start breathing now. And there's definitely something going on inside of my belly. Yeah. And so I think because we were so excited and so curious and so also like no idea what's going on, we called the midwife who was on call at the time. And I think that was by 10 p.m. or something. So it wasn't like during the night, but yeah, late enough that I was like, do we still call her or not? But we called her, and she reassured us that like, it sounds perfect. If you can, just go, like, or not just if you can, but go back to sleep as much as you can, and then come in tomorrow for the appointment that's scheduled anyway. And we did that. I got a full night of sleep, which was really good. And then we went into the birth center in the morning, first thing. I think we did a CTG. I think that was part of the routine checkup. But you could really feel that Carlo didn't really want it. Like he was like trying to move away and pushed against it. Now I know why, but you could like on the CTG monitor, you could see that there were like some mild contractions going on, somewhat regular. I think they were like 10 minutes apart or something, but then also going away again. And everything looked perfect. And so part of that routine checkup was for us to go into one of their partner hospitals and get a ultrasound of the amniotic fluid to see if the levels were okay. And so we went there and they had us waiting in the waiting room for at least an hour. And I remember so clearly because during that time, the practice contractions, as I would call them, would intensify. So I was sitting there meditating and really breathing through like every wave that was coming. It wasn't painful in that sense, but I did have to concentrate a little bit and breathe. And just because of the intensity of it, we went inside for the checkup. Everything was good. And also at that moment, me sitting there on the, I think I was sitting on the birth ball after the checkup while we were still talking to the doctor. And David took a photo of me. I can send it to you too. You would not think that I was going to give birth during that day. Yeah. But that's also how I felt. And I think that was continuing also throughout the birth. Like I was still very energetic, like, and still feeling very healthy in my body. And so then we went home, we laid down, we watched a movie, or we tried to finish. I don't know if we started that movie the night before or not, but we were watching a movie and tried to finish it. But at some point, like the intensity was getting so strong that I told David we need to I think we put it on pause because I was breathing so in like, or the contractions were becoming so intense that I really needed to like focus within, close my eyes and breathe. And then I think we had put laptop away already. And then there was one contraction coming where I remember I was breathing so much into my belly, like really directing all of the breath, all of the energy there. And then while I was like on really the absolute out, like the how to say, the most blown up part, if you will, there was a plop. And I really felt it as a plop.
Oh, really?
And then the amniotic sac opened. And it was a little, like a gush of warm water. I was like, oh, I think my water broke.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we again called the midwife, told her. I think there was also, I forgot, in the morning there was actually also a little bit of a mucus plug already coming out. So I knew about that and I saw it. And then I think after the amniotic sac opened, there was a little bit of a bloody show. Like not a lot, but a little bit. And then we called the midwife, told her about like what had happened. And she, again, like very kindly reassured us that it all sounded perfect. And I think she asked us whether we would feel comfortable just like staying at home for a little longer. And basically because there was a shift change about to happen. So another midwife would come on call and then she would contact us to basically agree for an appointment, which we did. And I think she came about 1.5 hours later. So throughout that time, we were so excited when everything like properly started. Like we were looking at each other. It's happening and it's starting now. And I think there we had a little bit of I had a little moment of happy tears, like from the excitement. We were really using those first few hours. We were putting on our birth playlist that we had created. And then I think I first started sitting on the birth ball and just tried out different positions. But it was really a trial and error, just like going through anything that I knew and just like seeing what feels good, what doesn't. There was some really funny poses in the meantime. I think like an inverted frog pose, for example, which was a little bit strange, but it felt good for a moment. And then I think we started dancing and just swaying back and forth a little bit. And the more intense things got, the more I leaned into David, which was really beautiful to also have him by my side and just, yeah, be able to lean on him. But of course, still being very much with my own experience. And then after that, at some point I sat down and I I think I also asked him to turn off the music. So I sat down on the edge of the bed and went into a bit of a meditative state, really focusing on the internal experience, focusing on the breathing, yeah, tuning in with my body and the baby. And then the midwife came. She was one of the midwives that we had met already throughout like our pregnancy at the birth center when we did one of the preparation sessions. And she was actually the one that we had talked our birth preparation letter through with. So we were talking with her about how we wanted to give birth, like what we were hoping for and wishing for. And it was perfect because she already, like from that appointment, she already knew most of the things. She knew us. We had talked about these things. So there was definitely a big sense of familiarity, which I am very grateful for. I think that definitely contributed also to the safe environment. And so she came with a practice midwife, and I think for the first couple of minutes they were just sitting there and just like watching me and just observing. And then she asked whether she could perform a vaginal examination, which I consented to because I was just curious at the time, and I was like, I didn't know about the adverse effects that you can have with the vaginal examinations. So I think that naivety in that moment was really good for me because I was also curious and I just wanted to know. I think I knew that it didn't really say anything necessarily, but I also didn't mind, if that makes sense. So we did that, and I think we were at about 4 centimeters. Was it 4 or 6? No. But she was happy with that. And we basically agreed that we would just continue for however long we felt comfortable being at home. Shortly before she arrived, I had already had that craving of, ooh, I would love to go into the birth pool already. Now, of course, that has me thinking, maybe if I would have gone to the birth pool earlier already, potentially we would have given birth even earlier. But of course, it's just like hypothetical. Instead, we stayed home, which I think was the right thing to do. And I went into the bathtub, but just for a few moments. And it was not what I needed at all, which was funny because I was craving the water. And I actually also gave birth later in the birth pool. But it wasn't the bathtub that I wanted. But it was good that I tried. So I came out, and after that bathtub, I started shivering completely. Maybe it was the warm water, and maybe it was also because I hadn't really eaten a lot. But it took us a moment to figure out what was going on. I was just like there sitting shaking, and I think David put a blanket over me, and I put on socks, and I think otherwise I was still naked. Maybe I started putting on some things in that moment. Yeah. Then I think he gave me a banana, and that was a magic trick for me. I also know that like whenever my blood sugar is like, running away, a banana is always helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always been like that, and I love bananas.
Perfect.
Yeah. Also, that's definitely also one of the things I learned throughout my wild party times. Like when I was forgetting to eat during those times, a banana would always like bring my system back into center. Or whenever I would have too much acidity in my stomach, and that happens sometimes, the banana, magic trick.
Magic trick. Beautiful. Pro tip. But
I'm
during
not sure if
this,
it would work for everyone. I think, if you don't like bananas, they won't do the trick. But I think finding out what that magic trick can be for you and having that readily available is a really good preparation.
yeah, that's perfect actually. So good advice, really. And also knowing that about yourself, I think is very good. I just wanted to ask, during this time when you were feeling shaky, were you still kind of inward and breathing through your contractions, or were you kind of like contacting the outer world and like being present, or how were you feeling at that time?
I think that was so I think those a few hours, and maybe to again put it into a little bit of context, we're talking about the water broke at I think 4 p.m. something. Yeah. And I gave birth at 11:25 at night. So we're talking about a 6.5 hour period. I don't know the exact what exactly was, because of course that whole thing was timeless. But I think those first few hours and the majority of it, I was very much focused inward. Still moving a lot and intuitively navigating the outer world, which was just like the big bedroom that we had and the bathroom right next to it. That was my world. And when I was shaking, I was sitting in the bedroom, and I was definitely coming a little bit more out of that zone. It felt a little bit like the beginning of a break, because I was, or maybe not necessarily a break yet, but I think the contractions were a little bit lower because I was more in the, like, my body was taking over, and it was a little bit more focused on that shaking sensation, on that, like, also like making sure that I'm taken care of. And so the contractions weren't as intense at the time. And but I was still very, very deep in the hormonal sensations, I would call it. I could really feel, it was like I could feel the veil between the worlds, like I was so, like, the hormones were so strong at the time that I was having a hard time even like opening my eyes properly. And I remember looking at myself in a mirror, and I was in a different realm completely. Yeah, and I think it was like, maybe that was the descent, because I was also like, yeah, I was, shortly after, at least, I was briefly questioning whether I can do it, because I think once I had eaten that banana, there was a little bit of a break. But then, so I think that was like, that whole thing was my transition, because then I remember going to the bathroom because I think I needed to pee. And then the contractions were really, like, all of a sudden they hit me completely, and with an intensity that I didn't feel before, and that I also wasn't prepared for. I think, like, all of the contractions before, I could breathe through easily, rather easily. Like, it was intense, but like I was dealing well with them. And then that one contraction that came after, it just hit me completely. And I think that was the first pushing contract. Like, it felt like the first pushing sensation. And it was such a force that I went into sounding at that point. I remember I went into a big, and I think I must have clenched my jaw a little bit because it hurt. That was the first time it really hurt. And I catched myself quickly and continued with the sounding, but also tried out different sounds like the O and ooh, and also continued with the ah. But I really made sure, like, that everything was like loose again, because I think I was using the term floppy face, floppy fanny from the Naked Ruler.
Yeah.
And yeah, that really stuck with me, and it helped a lot. So yeah, but I, like, the intensity in that moment was on a different level. I say I think because I'm thinking back to that moment right now. And David told me, no, I told him, I can't do it. I can't do it. I'm not sure if I can have this baby. And he looked at me and he goes, babe, you were born for this. You can do it. And it was a very brief moment, but yeah, I basically snapped out of it, and I was like, okay, but then let's go to the birth center now. And so I put on clothes. He went outside to go and get a car. I think he helped me put on clothes before. He went outside because we didn't have our own car, and he got a rental. And then, yeah, I just sat there, continued breathing, and the intensity was still very high. And then he came and picked me up. We went down the hallway, the stairs, into the car, which, yeah, funnily, some other people thought were theirs, and they were about to go in. But I think David had, like, I was already sitting there, and I was just having a big contraction, and they were trying to get in the car, and David was like, "No, this is not your car." And when they saw me, they realized and quickly went away. But it was like late in the
Good.
night on a Berlin street, so yeah. And then we drove to the birth center, which was, I think, a 20-minute drive. There were a couple of, like, celebrations going on, like, on the days around that. So the streets were really empty. And David will always tell me, or always tells me, that for him, this was the most beautiful and scenic drive. Like, the sun was going down, like this beautiful, magical sunset going down. And I just, like, I was in my own world. I noticed whenever there was a bump on the road, but
Yeah.
it was all right. But I didn't see the sun going down at all. I was just with Kylo, with my baby, who, I think we had the name already, but we hadn't really spoken it out yet. I think we wanted to wait and, like, hold him in our hands before we would actually give him the name. Yeah, but I was just, like, communicating with him on a different level and breathing through the contractions. I think that's really all I did. Yeah, and then we arrived there, and the midwife had already arrived, and prepared the space. I think David called her when we decided to go and get the car. And I just went straight into the pool. I think she guided me and helped me, but I could still walk quite well. And I think I think we were the only ones there at the time. And so we could choose, or we could have our preferred room, which was a really big and beautiful room with the pool in and the bed right next to it. I think it's called Morgenröte, morning redness. I don't know what you would translate to, but it has a beautiful name. And I just took off my clothes and went into the pool straight away. It was so clear that this is the only thing I'm doing here because I had been craving it a couple of hours before already. And so I went in. I think David came in shortly after because he had parked the car and he sorted out some of the admin stuff, giving them our documents and everything. And then he sat besides me. And so I think shortly after that, we did I think I first accustomed in the pool and just relaxed and continued breathing through contractions. I think a second midwife joined shortly after because that's how they do it in Germany. One is like taking care of the documentation and one is just present. But I didn't even notice her coming in really. I remember that we were asked whether they should take some photos, which we consented to, and I'm really happy they did. In hindsight, I would have loved to hire a professional photographer, but that's for the next. Yeah, so we did one more vaginal examination. And I think we were at 8 or 9 centimeters. So there was like a big progress. And you could really, like, for the midwives, it confirmed that the birth was imminent. But she also said, and she wrote in our birth documentation that it was very clear that this was about to happen already. And I could also feel that, like, I knew it was about to happen. But again, I didn't have a problem with the VE. But I also, and this is very interesting, I completely forgot about it. I only remembered it once I read about it when I looked at the notes of the birth for Kylo's second birthday. Yeah, which I find interesting, very interesting, that you just completely forget it. But I mean,
Do you mean you forgot the vaginal examination?
Yeah.
Ah, yeah.
It was just like I didn't have it on my mind at all. I think it was also like probably entirely unnecessary, but it also didn't do any harm. Yeah, and then I think for the last 1.5 hours, I was just in the pool, breathing through the contractions, moving very intuitively. But also in the meantime, I asked the midwife if there was another position that I could try out. I think at one point they suggested another to really, because I was sitting in a frog pose basically. So, that can, like, depending on the stage of the birth, it can put strain on the perineum. So she just suggested a gentler version where I lie on my side and have the leg a little bit closer together. And that was actually then the position that I gave birth in. I think shortly before I made a joke somehow because I said something about this is because what I said, let's start with that. Sorry, my thoughts are running too quickly. I think it was something like, well, this is definitely a little more than just breathing out my baby because I was definitely sounding a lot. It felt very primal, but in the best way possible. I think for me, that was really part of my rewilding and connecting with my wild nature. It was absolutely necessary and absolutely beautiful, and I loved it. And I was also like, I could feel that my body was the leading force in the pushing the baby out, but I was also working with it. So I was definitely also breathing and pushing out, if that makes sense. So it wasn't just like the silent, gentle breathing that you sometimes see on some of the gentle birth videos, or also what I had envisioned, because I did read the hypnobirthing book. And they speak a lot about this very, very calm, very gentle, very silent way of breathing out your baby. And I had somehow envisioned that for me. And now looking at it, I'm very happy that it wasn't just that it was actually this more primal, a little bit wild and very physical experience, because it's exactly what I needed. It's exactly, I think for me it is, and I continue to realize it is so important to reconnect with that wild nature, with the wild woman within. And of course, I'm all about like gentleness and like calm environment and everything. But if it comes natural, and it does come natural for me for like a lot of the time,
Yeah.
for a big part of the things that I do. But also I have this intensity inside of me that wants to be expressed, like, and I think that is the wild part of me that we all carry inside of us. I mean, not just women, but I think especially as women, we have been socialized out of that so much, with like the good girl conditioning and always being kind and nice and, all these things. And so
Yeah.
I think that was a very, very liberating moment for me, which I was definitely laughing about a lot because it was just, it was very, very funny to me. And it was very funny to everyone in the room at the time. Yeah. And then I think a few waves later, I was like, the head was actually it was not just descending anymore. It was already coming out. At some point, the midwife told me, yeah, if you want to, because we had spoken about this, that I was hoping to actually receive my baby myself, to like be the first one guiding, like to be the one guiding him out and then taking him out of the water. I was envisioning water birth already. And so the midwife told me, yeah, like if you want, you can like use your hands and feel for the head of your baby. And like at that stage, I could actually already feel his head. It was very, very wobbly because it was like still compressed, which was a little crazy to feel. And I could also feel the hair. And it was such an incredible moment. I was like, I can feel my baby. It's there. Very, very profound. Yeah. And then I think there was one or two more contractions. Like they were definitely among the most intense was the crowning. But it was good that I was having my hand there as well, being able to feel everything from the inside and the outside. I mean, maybe I was a little distracted from the outside, but it didn't do any harm. But the inside experience was also very intense and very clear. But I could, it was a very slow descent. So the head was moving back and forth a lot and it felt very natural. And I think it protected my perineum very well. I only had one, I think, like tiny bruise, which didn't really need any treatment. Yeah, and then one more contraction, and then the head was out, and then one more, and the whole body came. And then I took him out of the water and put him onto my chest. And I think that moment went almost a little fast, like I didn't really have time to really look at him. So I was just going like this and looking at him, but somehow something of like just wanted to have him very close, I guess. And then this was definitely one of those moments where I was looking at him. I couldn't believe it. I was looking at David and we were kissing and we were super excited. And I was so overwhelmed by emotion. Like I knew I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. And I was just having him here and just looking at him still sitting in the water and just sitting in that joy, in that pure love, pure joy. A little disbelief still. And I think we just sat there for a little while, for a couple of minutes. Yeah, just touching him and talking to him, saying hi, smelling him. Very precious moments. And then I have no idea how much time it was, but we definitely sat there for a couple of minutes, maybe 15 or 20 or something like that. And then after, it can't be, maybe 10 minutes. And then the midwives suggested, hey, maybe if you like, you can also go into the bed to birth the placenta. So, and by the way, David was sitting, like for most of the time, he was sitting somewhere around me, and I was also leaning into him for some part of the contractions while I was still doing the position changes, which was really beautiful to be able, just to lean into him and onto him and let myself be held. There's just this thought right now that I feel worth sharing, because we've been speaking about the birth together like a lot of times. And what's interesting is that, especially in this context of the rite of passage and having to cross the threshold alone, it's so interesting that we both feel like, if we were together and he was holding me through all of it. And at the same time, I was so inside my own inner experience, and I was on my own with my baby, of course, but for like a lot of it, because I was just in my inner experience. And I find it so beautiful how both of these, they seem paradoxical. They seem like you can't be alone and have someone with you. But now it's so funny that we spoke about this in the beginning, because this is the essence of our relationship. I can be alone when I am with him. And I think that's so beautiful, because that was also how it was during the birth. I was fully inside my body and inside my process and inside my inner world with my baby. And yet he was there holding me, protecting me, and also like interacting with me whenever it was needed and helpful. but no more than necessary. Yeah, so it was beautiful to be able to lean into him and be held. And I think like during the final moments, he was just sitting outside again with the legs in. And then when Kylo was born, like after he was born, he came in, and there was actually a little bit of waves being created before it got calm again. Yeah, and then we went out. The midwife supported me in walking while I was still carrying Kylo, and we laid down on the bed. And then I think just like a few minutes after that, placenta came out already. I was like, the midwife already told me it's possible that you just, you feel a sensation inside your vagina. And if it feels good, just like, again, push with it. And like the placenta really came out with one whoosh. Very easy, very gentle, nothing compared to the intensity of the birthing contractions. Yeah, and then the midwives put the placenta into a container, like a bowl, and because we had already spoken about that, we want to leave the cord intact until it's fully pulsed out, and ideally even a little bit longer. So at least for the first golden hour, which they supported very beautifully. And they also left us on our own, so we could really experience that first golden hour on our own. I just made sure we had everything to drink, to eat, and whatever we needed, and we were warm. And then we were just laying there and just in a little bit of disbelief, but mostly in joy and in pure love, and just looking at this little precious baby that had just entered into this realm. Yeah, magical.
So magical.
Mm.
Wow. What an experience and what a story.
Yeah, it was an absolute dream birth for sure. It was a lot of the things that I had envisioned and that I had hoped for, and so much more. Yeah, I'm so grateful for that.
I have one question to maybe sum up with, if you want to tell us shortly. I mean, you told us that this was really your dream birth, but now is there anything you maybe would do differently in another birth, like in the future?
Yeah, I think, let's put it this way. That birth was everything I had dreamed of and envisioned at the time. And in that sense, it was absolutely perfect, and I wouldn't change a thing about it. In hindsight, of course, there were some things that I would probably do differently now. If I now look at, like, because for us it's very imminent, we're definitely connecting with the spirit baby realm lately a lot for some time already. It's not just very recently. It's definitely been on the radar for the last half year or so. And so I'm already sensing into the next birth coming up. And I know that for the next birth, also knowing what I know now and trusting, like having like confirmed that intuitive trust, also with experience, I know for sure that I want to have an even freer and even wilder setting for both the preparation and the birth. I mean, right now I feel like I don't necessarily need checkups or ultrasounds unless my intuition tells me. You know, and it's interesting because David yesterday, somehow we spoke about it either yesterday or this morning, I don't know. And I think yesterday, because we were talking about ultrasounds for another reason. And I was like, yeah, I don't even want any ultrasounds. Oh no, he was asking because we're about to travel again a little bit more. And he was like, how do we do it when we're traveling with, like doctor's appointments, ultrasounds, these kind of things? And I was like, I don't need any ultrasounds. I know it. I don't need it. And if I feel like I need one, then there will be one. And he was like, but how do you know if you need one? I was like, my intuition will tell me. And somehow that's so clear to me now that this is how it is. I mean, I don't want to jinx anything, but
just like your body tells you, like coming back to what we were speaking of in the beginning, just like your body tells you what to eat, or your baby tells you what to eat, your baby will tell you what you need. You will feel that. If you're in tune, you will feel that. And having heard you talk about your journey and your birth and everything, like you're so in touch with your body. So there's no doubt you'll know.
Yeah. Yes. That's the level of trust that I always come back to. Trust in my body, in my intuition, in my baby. And so that's that. And then I have no idea what the exact birth setting will look like or where it will be. That's because I somehow, I have a feeling that my baby will tell me once it's in my womb, and that will open up at a later stage. But I know that I want it to be a freer setting. I don't know if it's going to be a home birth or like an actual free birth. I think that's still to be seen. It also depends on what's available and what's going to happen. My tendency is towards a free birth, but I would love to have support, not in a sense of like needing to be held emotionally, but I know that it would definitely be helpful because I know I can hold my space myself, but I definitely know that I want someone to take care of the logistics so David can focus on being with me. Yeah, so calling in that support for sure. And I mean, who knows what else is going to happen? I'm definitely open to some magical things like drumming during the birth, which I can't do myself. So yeah, but I don't know. It's very interesting because there's so little things that I feel like that have to be there. I'm so open right now for the experience that my baby also wants and needs. And yeah, just so open to like co-create when the time is here. Right now I can feel it's still so far away. I don't need to engage so much in envisioning. Yeah, but that
But
direction.
even though it's far away, we can't wait to have you on in the future and hear you tell that story, that future birth.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is there
I feel like
anything
telling this.
else? Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add before we
Yeah.
round up?
So I feel like because the picture that we've painted of that birth is very dreamy, and it was an absolute dream birth. But I don't know, maybe that's the Scorpio inside of me or like whatever it is. I always want to keep things, I feel like it's very important to keep things also very real and and all of that was absolutely real. Like nothing of that was made beautiful or, but I also, maybe making things very real was the wrong sentence. But I also, I always find it important to also show the sides that maybe aren't as visible. So for example, what was missing now from the birth story, actually, let's put it this way, was that I think in the 13th week or so, 38 or 39, Kylo was still in a breech position. And in Germany, you can't birth or can't have a breech birth in the normal birth centers or normal hospitals. You have to have a specialized hospital. There is one in Berlin, but of course we wanted to give birth in a birth center. And so when basically the midwives presented this to us, it was either we deregister from giving birth at a birth center and just see what happens, or we need to intervene in a way of trying for an external rotation. And we went for that. So we went to that hospital who are also doing natural births in breech position. The whole process was very gentle, very beautifully also supported by the obstetrician there. It was the most gentle like suggestion for the baby for Kylo to turn around. And she also said, I'm just gonna like give a mild push. And if you feel like, or if she feels that the baby doesn't want to turn for some reason, I mean, some breaches definitely have a reason with the umbilical cord and everything, then she would not continue. But interestingly, the nerve-wracking moment for me was the moment like shortly before that when she told me about the risks. Because a risk, of course, a potential risk would be that, let's say, like that the baby doesn't turn. I mean, of course, that's a risk. But the worst risks down the line, which she came to, was maybe we have to do a cesarean, maybe contractions start, maybe we have to do a cesarean, these kind of things. And I'm not sure if even potential death was on the line, but we were shortly before that. Which I think says a lot about risk management in hospitals and care facilities. And in that moment, when she mentioned, I think it was less the death thing, I think it was more the potential cesarean, I could feel fear creeping in on me. And my heart was starting to race. And I was like, I could feel myself tense up. And somehow, maybe because I was conscious of it at that time already, that like this whole process of birth for me was about working with my fears and not against them, not trying to push them away, but really like staying present with them and breathing through. I did that, and I could feel how it was a fantastic preparation for the actual birth later on. Like really staying present with everything, not trying to get away from that fear, but really being there, breathing through it, and just connecting with my baby. Interesting that I didn't. Nah, it doesn't matter. I told it now. I'm just wondering why it wasn't already part of the story before. Anyway, I did that, and then we did the rotation, and the baby turned immediately. I think in the end, he still had more than 2 weeks until he was going to be born. And my intuition also told me that he was he was going to turn eventually. But that moment, I think it's one that's still difficult, that I haven't fully processed what it brought me. That also, I mean, it's not part of the birth itself, but it's still part of the wider process. And yeah, like, I have put so many interpretations in that moment, because I think that was one of the most challenging moments for me during that birth and during that whole process. And also one of the most confusing ones, because throughout most of the pregnancy, I'd gone through so trusting, so knowing, so intuitive. And then there I was, not wanting any interventions, but clearly doing it, something intervening, and also not trusting, or like, like it being in that ambivalence of, I know I trust my intuition, I know he will turn, but at the same time, there's this situation that is creating that fear around not being able to give birth in the birth center, not wanting to go into the hospital. Interesting. I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it, but I think it did. I mean, it's of course multi-layered and very complex, but it definitely, I think it was one of the moments helping me, like, where I already faced some of my fears beforehand, which is why I think the birth went so smooth as it did. And I was facing some of my shadows, some of the underworld stuff already in preparation. It also, I think it was a part of strengthening my intuition, like, interestingly. And it was also part of, like, both coming back into trust and at the same time also balancing, like, not resisting support from the outside, So, like, yeah, and I think it was definitely one of these introductions for me into the duality of motherhood, where, like, you will always have two things which seem absolutely contradicting, true, but being true at the same time. That was definitely one of those moments. And I continue to have them, like, ever since. I feel like that's my whole life now. Feeling two things at the same time, which feel absolutely contradicting, but are both so, so true.
I think you will still keep learning from that birth and that pregnancy in the future. There are still things to be discovered, as always.
Yeah, that's so right.
Thank you so much.
Such a beautiful integration.
Thank you too so much for holding space for me to do that.
Of course.
Thank
I
you.
said, we can't wait to have you on in the future and tell your future birth story.
Yay. I'm already excited.
Beautiful.
When women come together to heal, magic happens. When women heal, we change the world. Rise, earth, mother's word.